Well, shalom aleichem, everyone. Why I said that is that we are brothers and sisters who need to take care of each other, not only our fellow Jews, but particularly important for us to do so for the family of humanity. So shalom aleichem. May there be peace for all the world. I'm very fond of a story which is presumably true, and that is after World War I, or during its conflagration, there was an 80-year-old man who took responsibility for bringing a group of Jews from Russia to Palestine, that there had been enough already of pogroms and hatred, enough already. And so there was this small but significant group of people that made it to the border, to the Russian border, so that they could leave behind those pogroms. And they got to a part of the border where there was a tall tower and a hut at the top of the tower in which stood individuals, soldiers of the Russian army. And the Jewish group meant to quietly step over the border and move on their way until there was a soldier at the top of the booth that yelled out from the top of it, "Halt! Who are you? And where are you going? Don't move one more step further." This 80-year-old man looked up at him and said, "We're Greeks, and we're going back to our homeland, Greece." And the soldier got onto the ladder, crawled down that long ladder, and walked right up to the Jewish man who said he was a Greek. And all the other soldiers were listening. And he said, "Where did you say you were from?" He said, "From Greece." And he put his face close to the old man and said, "Shalom aleichem." And then he looked at all the soldiers and he said, "These people are Greeks. We'll let them return to Greece." And he whispered again, "Shalom aleichem. I am a Jew as well." It's a powerful story because it represents how vital it is for us to be able to do that which is necessary in order to enrich the lives, enhance the lives of our fellow Jewish people around the world, and to stand staunch as a group of Jewish people for the support and the nourishment and the sustenance of the state of Israel. Because the view of what Israel represents today is far different than it was at the time of World War I or any time during the medieval ages, because Israel has become a star in terms of all sorts of aspects of life, from technology to medicine to the ability to support itself and sustain itself. If we don't remember what it was like in order to be sustained, knowing there was so much anti-Semitism, if we don't remember what has happened in the past, then it could be repeated. George Santayana said in 1905, "Those who fail to remember the past are destined to relive it." We can't go back to the days where there was such persecution and fear. But yet we've seen growing anti-Semitism in our country and throughout the world. The Anti-Defamation League has said that between 2015 and 2019, anti-Semitism jumped to a record high. Most notably, that which took place in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, when 11 worshipers at that synagogue were decimated and murdered. We should never forget how important it is to be diligent in supporting our people. It's not just our people, all people, but that we need to be supporters of the Jewish people. When I went to Russia many years ago, I went with one other person. The Jewish organizations who were supporting Soviet Jews were sending as many people as possible who'd be willing to go to the Soviet Union. It was the Soviet Union. It was and it wasn't like the period of Putin today. It was dangerous. And I went with a businessman who was responsible because he had done such significant amount of travel and knew how to maneuver his way through European cities. And my responsibility was, since I talk a lot, to talk to the Jewish people that we might meet. It was 20 below zero when we were in Moscow. And our first task was to meet an individual. We had names and telephone numbers for these people. About 30 families we were supposed to connect to and bring items to which would help them be sustained. And the man said to me, "I'll meet you tonight at 11 o'clock in a park across the street from a railroad station." And I took that bus there to the railroad station, and I went down the escalator, and I went outside, and it was well over 20 below zero. And he had told me to cross the street and enter the park. And I did so, thinking also I must have been crazy to do this. And I was all alone in that dark, and the wind was blowing. And I thought, I can't stay here forever. But I heard a soft voice behind me, someone from behind a tree, and he said, "Shalom Aleichem." And I turned around, and I saw this soul individual, and I said, "Alechem Shalom." And we became good friends. And there were a few things that he needed if I might be able to help. And we did so. It was an example to me how vital it is for us to do what we need to do to ensure the lives of our fellow Jewish people. The opportunities to meet Jewish people when you don't even realize it is widespread. There is a story, true story, of a German Jew who somehow was able to find safe haven during the war in Berlin. And in fact, there was a book written about the Jews who survived, of all places, in Berlin from the Nazis. And this particular man lived in the basement of a good friend who was obviously non-Jew. And he was able to live for a number of years in that basement. And then he heard on the news that the Russians had overtaken the Germans and that they were now in Berlin to occupy the city. And this Jewish man was so thrilled with the fact that the war was over and that the Russians had come to liberate the city that he ran upstairs from the basement. He threw the door open. It was a beautiful day with sun shining, and he ran out into the street, took a deep breath of free air for the first time in a half dozen years. And he saw a group of Russian soldiers marching down the street. And when they reached him, they looked at him and grabbed him by the arm and said, "You're a German." And they threw him against the wall because the Russians were murdering Germans right and left right after the war. He said, "You don't understand. I'm not a German. I'm a Jew." And they said, "Don't say that. You speak German like you are from Berlin. And if you had been a Jew, you would have been murdered long ago in the concentration camps. You're lying. Be prepared to die." They threw him up against the wall, and he knew it was the end of his life. And in an undertone, he recited, because he knew it was the end of his life, "Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad." Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. But he said just the Hebrew, "Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad," just as the Russian was going to shoot. One of the Russian soldiers slapped at that rifle, and the bullet went flying upward. And he said, "Just wait 1 second." And he walked over to the man against the wall, and he said, "What is it you said?" He said, "I was just saying a prayer that we Jews say prior to our death. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad." And the Russian soldier said, "Baruch Shem Kavod Machuto Le'olam Va'ed." He said, "I'm a Jew." And he looked at the other Russian guards and he said, "This man is Jewish. Let him live. He's not a German." And it saved his life, and these two became friends and close associates for years and years afterwards. That we cling tenaciously to our resolve to do what we can to help the world. And that's when we make this same quest universalistic. One of the most important verses in the Torah that we read is Tzedek, Tzedek Tirdof. Justice, justice shall you pursue. And the rabbis wrote with regards to the commentary is that the reason why the word tzedek was repeated, tzedek, tzedek, righteousness, righteousness, justice, justice, because if it's not just for me, it shouldn't be just for you. If it's just for me, it's just for you. If it's just for Jews, it's just for non-Jews. If it's just for non-Jews, it's just for Jews. That all human beings, irrespective of their nationality or their culture or their faith, are to be offered the dignity that they deserve as human beings. And that becomes a focal point of our teachings as Jewish people. But never forget, too, the need to try to do that which we can to defend our fellow Jew. On one of my trips in 1982, I was a member of the United Jewish Appeal Rabbinic Program, and we took a number of trips around the world. We went to Romania, we went to a variety of European countries. And in 1982, we went to Israel. Why did we go to Israel in 1982? Is because the Lebanese and the Israelis were at war. And Israel soundly defeated the terrorists in Lebanon. And we traveled. We were going to try to go to Beirut. There were about 25 of us who were rabbis, and we were asked to come back and share our experiences in the United States. We went to Lebanon, and in Lebanon, we were hoping to go to Beirut, but there was still fighting in Beirut. In fact, we heard explosives as we got to Sidon, which was further south than Beirut. And the fighting was over in Sidon. It's the third largest city in Lebanon. And it was a mess. It was just a mess. Buildings just decimated. People seemed so out of sorts. But we learned what it was like, that Israel actually had been a significant victor in this battle. And we were to get back to Israel before sundown. So we boarded the bus, and I looked out over a group of 25 or so young men who were in their 20s and 30s, and they were looking at our bus, which had Hebrew lettering on it, Egged, the Egged bus. And they knew we were Jews. And I'll never, ever forget the look of hatred that was on their faces. They were just itching to rip us apart because we represented the Jewish people. We represented the land of Israel. And the bus took off. And we went back to Israel. But before we got to Israel, there were some Orthodox rabbis who were on the bus, and they started to yell from the back of the bus as it was getting a little bit late, 5:30 in the afternoon, that we had a military guide with us, and they shouted to the guide from Israel, "Stop the bus, stop the bus." And the Israeli guide said, "Why? Why should we stop the bus? We have to get back to Israel before nightfall. We can't be here after nightfall." He said, "But the sun's setting. We need to stop the bus and daven Mincha Marav. We have to daven Mincha Marav." The military guide from Israel said, "We're not stopping the bus. You might as well daven in the bus." He said, "No, we've got to get out and watch the sunset. God demands that we observe Mincha Marav, and we have to watch the sunset." And the guide said, "Rabbi, in this bus, I'm God. And we're not stopping, we're going back to Israel." And when we got to Israel, before he let us out of the bus, he said, "I just want to tell you something. I was pretty hard on you back then when you, particularly the Orthodox fellows, wanted to get off and daven. He said, you didn't realize it. I think some of you thought that there was a problem with our bus backfiring. But about the time you had wanted to get off the bus, we were being fired upon by Lebanese hostile people. And there was no way we were going to stop the bus in order for you guys to get out and do Mincha Maariv. But we're here safe once again. And I do have a number of other stories, but I'll conclude by underscoring how this holiday, particularly so fearful of what is going to happen with regards to all minorities around the world, from Afghans to Jews, and unless we are able to understand tzedek tirdof, we have to defend our people, but all people need to be defended as well. Otherwise, we don't fulfill the mission of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to make amends, to make the world better. Let it be better by our own devotion and our interest in humanity, as we say, Amen.